Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Deconstruction Fridays, where we deconstruct topics that help us become better developers and hopefully better people too. Maybe not better people, because I can't help you much with that. But in this week's episode, we are going to deconstruct a software development topic that you may or may not have heard, which is design patterns. Now, if you want to build good software, you need to have some sort of a structure, some sort of well-studied, well-proven structure of building the software in such a way the software is robust and uses that proven structure of building software. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. Alright guys, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to talk about the MVC design pattern. Now, as usual, we're going to start off with a little motivation here so we can visualize the whole idea behind this. Now, suppose we want to build a payroll system. So if you think of a payroll system right off the bat, you will understand that there's a lot of components that we need to put together in order to create the system in place, right? So we can have a lot of classes like an employee class, we can have employee dashboard class, we can have employee controller, and so many other classes involving the whole system. Now, the idea here is very interesting when we talk about MVC design pattern. What we're trying to do here is, as we look at this payroll system, we're looking at different components that are responsible for compartmentalizing the responsibilities, right? So we are separating responsibilities. So we could have, for instance, classes that pertain to employee. So we can divide the employee classes that are more towards models, right? Classes. And we got the employee dashboard and employee control. So that we are separating, obviously, the responsibility for each class. Now, the model view controller, so to take this a little bit further, what it does is it takes all of these compartmentalized codes or classes, or responsibilities, right, and structure them into different categories. So for an employee, we would call the model, because it's going to be model of something, in this case an employee, a real employee, right? So a real employee would have a name, an employment number, social security number, and so forth. Okay. And then, of course, we have the dashboard. Now, the dashboard here is the view in which the payroll system admin can go and view, for instance, the name of the employee, the salary, when were they born, if they're married, and any other information that they are able to go and see. Okay? That's what they can. That's a view. So that is indeed what clients, the admin in this case, or maybe the employee, can go and view, see. That's the view. And then we have inside also the controller, which acts as the connector between the employee model and the view, in this case, employee dashboard. Because the employee controller, what it does, it rounds everybody up, if you will, in this case, the model and view, and starts delegating, right? It knows exactly how to control, hence the name, the view and the model. The data in the model class changes, the controller will know to update the employee dashboard or view, and vice versa. So really, you can imagine if you're working on a big project, this is very ideal, because if you look at it, the project gets bigger, and so it's very important to have all of those compartmentalization very well detailed so that we know, okay, if we want all of the model classes, we go to the model view part of things, and then we go to the view. All the view classes are there, which is the user interface, right? The things that people can see. Okay. And then, of course, we have controllers. So that's a very important concept, very important design pattern that I'm sure you've seen it many, many times over, or perhaps if you use any frameworks, they encourage you to use the model view controller. So it's a very famous, popular design pattern. Now let's look at how all of it comes together. So if you look again, our model view controller here. So we have the employee dashboard, which is the view. Okay, that's the thing that we can actually see and interact with. So to the right, we have the demo app. This is our drive test main, if you will, right? So what happens here is in the middle, we have the controller. So the controller has instances, obviously, as you can see, of the employee, which is the model, and also the dashboard or employee dashboard, which is, of course, the view, okay, because it controls all of that. So it is the connector, if you will, for our system here. So if we want, for instance, the view, the dashboard, to update the employer name, then we go through the controller because it has an instance of employee, so it knows exactly what to do. It knows exactly which employee we are going to update the dashboard with. Okay, so you can see here the relationship is that our client will use the employee controller, which uses the employee, as you can see, we have that instance, and also uses the employee dashboard. That is the correlation that exists between all these three main components, which are model, view, controller. Okay. Now, the MVC uses other design patterns. The beauty here is that as we start talking about advanced design patterns, you can actually start mixing and matching all of the other design patterns into one. So we call this compound design pattern, which means, for instance, if you look at the employee and you look at the employee dashboard, which is the view, and of course the employee controller, the employee dashboard and employee controller, these are observers, because all of these, I'm talking about the employee dashboard and employee controller, they will be notified whenever state changes in the model. Right? So to the left here, we have a model, which is our employee. If something changes, they will be told, or they will be notified that, hey, something changed, we need to do stuff here. But also on top of that, you notice that we also have strategy design pattern, because remember, our view delegates the controller to handle user actions. And the controller needs to know exactly which action needs to be done. Right? For instance, if you have a screen which has a button, when you tap on that button, something could happen. If you want that button to also change of behavior, that could also happen, right? So there is that flexibility which comes from using the strategy design pattern. Now, if you don't really remember much about the strategy pattern, no worries, just go back to the previous videos and previous sections where we talk about the strategy design pattern. Just to reiterate here, the strategy design pattern allows us to create different algorithms of different actions at runtime, okay, for our classes. And also, you notice we have this composite way of putting things together here, because you notice the view could have a lot of different layouts. So the views could have labels, for instance, buttons inside of buttons, or views inside of views, and so forth, right? So it's composite, which means has a lot of other things inside of it. Okay, so there's a lot of things that are happening here when we use the MVC design pattern. All right, let's go ahead and put together our model view controller pattern here into action, right, that we showed you here, which is going to be a payroll system for us, right? We're going to have the employee controller, we're going to have the employee model, and the view employee dashboard. Very simple, but yet powerful. Okay, so going back here, I'm going to go ahead and create a few things as usual inside of our package here. I'm going to create a new package. This is going to be great so that we can actually reinforce what we're talking about here. I'm going to say model first, and next one, I'm going to say view, and you guessed, the next one's going to be controller. Okay, so we're going to have model, view, controller. Let's start with our model. Okay, so our model is going to model after a class that will represent an employee. So we're going to call this employee. It's just a simple class. And for our employee here, we're just going to do very simple. I'm going to give, for instance, I'm going to say name, or say first name, private string, last name, private string, SS number, as such, for social security. Okay, and that should be okay for now. Let's see. let's go ahead and create getters and setters to all of them because it's just easier that way. Okay, so now we have our employee model. That's great. Let's go ahead then and look at creating our view. In this case, it's going to be the employee dashboard. Let's go back. So view, inside of our view package, right click, Java. I'm going to call this, of course, employee dashboard. And you could say employee dashboard view too. Why not? Just to simplify things. Yeah, there we go. And what we're going to do here, I'm going to go ahead and create a public void, and I'm just going to say print employee information. Okay, as such. Of course, what we're going to do here is we're going to pass string. And to simplify, what I'm going to do, I'm going to just go ahead and actually pass here the model. Let's say private employee. Call this employee. So using a little bit of composition here. And I'm going to pass our employee as such. In fact, what I can do is just get rid of this. Okay, and let's just system out here, say name is going to be equal to employee dot get first name. Give it a little space here, just, you know, and employee again dot get last name. And then I'm going to say s out, SSN for social security number. Obviously this is sensitive information, but nevertheless you get the idea here, like that. Now what we're going to do also here is we are going to go back, because I would like to add another method. Let's go back to our employee. I'm going to add here private and say double, I'm going to say salary. Create a new getter and setter like such. And there we go. So we have get salary and set salary. Going back here, I'm going to just say s out again. Salary is going to be equal to employee dot get salary. Okay, there we go. So we have our print employee information. That's very good. So now that we have our view, right? This is what we are going to have in front for people to actually see. This is our view. Okay, we have our model, which is the employee. Okay, and now let's go ahead and put together the controller, which will allow to have this cycle of updating the view through the model and vice versa. Let's see what we called. We just called it employee controller. As such. Okay, so our employee controller, as you can see from our diagram here, it has an instance of employee and employee dashboard because it needs to control those two classes. So at the top here, right away, I'm going to use, say, private. I'm going to call this, had our employee. Let's just call employee model for simplicity. Dashboard, what do we call employee dashboard? View, I'm gonna call this, let's call this our view, right? I'm gonna create a constructor which will pass our view, our model that is, and our view, because we need those. So I instantiate them like that, set them up, and I'm gonna use here the, say, public void set student. Call this set employee, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to pass a string called name, another string called last name as such. Okay, and then here I'm going to just say employee model dot set first name. I'm going to pass name as such. an employee model that set last name. We're going to pass our last name for the employee. I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to say getter public string get employee name. I'm going to say return employee model that get name. I'm going to just go ahead and append it employee dot get last name. Okay, and let's go ahead and create another setter here, public void set SSN. Okay, I'm gonna just go and pass, I think we made it a string, it's fine. Say string SSN. I'm gonna say model, employee model that set as such. And of course, we're gonna go ahead and get it. Very simple, nothing really complicated here. It's gonna return a string SN return there we go. And this one at the bottom here, we're gonna create a method that will update our view. Okay, public void, I'm gonna call this update dashboard view such. So to update our view again, what we're gonna do, we're gonna use our view, right? Because we're inside our controller and we have the handle to our view here, a reference. We can now say our view dot print employee information. And for that to happen, we have to pass an employee object. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and pass our employee model as such, and it will take care of everything. Okay, so we've created our controller, we have our employee model, and we have our employee dashboard view. So inside of our controller, you see now we have our employee, our model reference, and our view reference, because we need those two. Remember again, they use each other in order to invoke or in order to update the view and connect to the model and make sure that the logic in the model is actually telling us what to do and go back and forth like that. We can use a client, which will then invoke our controller, and the controller will know everything, will know how to do everything to get the information. Okay. And in the next video, what we're going to do, we are going to give it a quick test here so we can see all of this in action. Perfect. I'll see you next. Now that we have our controller, our model, and view set up, it's time for us to give it a quick test here so we can see how it all works. Now, keep in mind, this is a very simplistic example. Obviously, in a real application, the view, in this case, would actually be an actual view, right? Where you can actually see all this information. So as a good exercise, what I would want you to do so that you can visualize this, if you're having troubles visualizing this, is to actually use the Swing framework, Java Swing framework, or any other framework that you may know of, that you are familiar with, and use that so you can actually create GUI, little user interfaces, so you can see all of these pieces coming together in a real real application. Okay, that's a very good exercise for you. But for now, this will work for us so that I can give you a better understanding of the model view controller design pattern. Okay, so let's go to main so we can do a little testing here. Let's get rid of that. So the first thing I'm going to do obviously is at the bottom here, I'm going to create a helper method here because we're going to call it inside of our static intro main here. I'm going to make it a static as well. I'm going to call this employee type because it's going to return us an employee. And I'm going to go ahead and say retrieve employee from server. Okay, so this is just emulating something that could happen in an actual real application, right? We're going to retrieve all the information from a server or a database. Okay, and here I'm going to create an employee, right? Steve simulating here what could have happened if we were actually getting remote data. And I'm going to say new employee. Just create our model, and then I'm going to just start adding things to our employee. I'm going to .set. I'm going to say it's going to be, should be an integer, of course, but that's fine. I'm going to make a string as well, something like this. Okay, and then employee .set name, say James. Employee .set last name Bond. Employee this is set. What else can we set? Social Security. We've done that. Salary. There we go. It's going to be, let's say, Mr. Bond makes $125,000 as such. Okay, there we go. And we're going to return our employee. So at the top here, we're going to do a few things. We're going to fetch our model, right? So I'm going to say employee. Right. James. I'm going to go just call the retrieve employee from server. So I have an employee. In fact, instead of just call this employee, it makes it easier because we could have changed these retrieve employee from server a different employee. So that's probably better naming convention there. And then what we're going to do, we're going to create our view. So I'm going to actually say create our view, okay, to which we will write our employee information into. Okay, so to create our view, I'm going to go ahead and say employee dashboard view, call this view, is equal to employee new employee dashboard view. Now, here we're going to create our controller. So we're going to say controller. So I'm going to say controller employee controller, call this controller new controller. Remember, employee controller, we have to pass a few things here. We have to pass the employee model and the view. Well, we already have the model, say employee, and the view, we call it view. Right? And this is very representative of what we're talking about here. If you look at our diagram again, is that the employee controller has to have a way of accessing the employee class or model, and of course the view, which is the dashboard, because it's the one who controls everything, so it has to know of what it needs to control. Okay. So now that we have that, our controller now can control things. For instance, now we can go ahead and say the following. We can say controller.update, right? We call the update method from our controller, which, if you remember correctly, it has this update dashboard, which we're using. But before we do that, what we need to do is to actually set all of these. There's a different way we could have created this. I could have done easily, because in our controller, I gave us the liberty to actually set things up, like the set employee name and all those, right? But also I gave these, added this other, this employee retrieve employee, this method, which will retrieve or create an employee for us. Either way, that doesn't matter. So now if we call our controller that update dashboard, we should see all the information showing. So I'm going to go and run this. And there we go. So name, James Bond, social security number, there it is, and salary. Okay, so this would have been an actual view that would have popped up and would retrieve all that information to show inside of our view. So now we have this relationship. We have here the model we created, we have the view, and then we have the controller, which we said we need to pass the employee, the model, and also the view, which are the two main components that we need in order for our controller to know exactly what to do with our view. Okay, and then we call controller to update the dashboard, to update the view, because that is the connection there, right? We have the controller that connects with the view model, the logic, right, where things are supposed to happen, and then at the same time it connects with the view. Okay, because it needs to update depending on what we're doing in our model. It needs to do whatever it needs to do. All right, so that's it, guys. That's it for our model view controller. And well, like I said, I want you to think of other examples that you will be able to use the model view controller in our application, or maybe in a framework that you've used before, and you can create examples and so that you really understand the power that you get from using the model view controller. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a little bit about the model view controller design pattern. Like I said before, there are many design patterns out there. So if you're really interested in learning more about design patterns, check out the link in the description below, where I have a more comprehensive explanations about all of the most popular design patterns. Thank you so much for taking the time and watching this Deconstruction Fridays episode for this week, and I hope again that you learned. And don't forget to subscribe, share this video with your friends, with your families, grandma and grandparents, if they're interested in learning. What are we learning here, of course? And what else? Yes, don't also forget to click on that little bell, because that will notify every time that I have new videos for you. So that's just a good deal. Thank you so much for your time. Be well, stay well, and of course, as always, code well.